So it's saying it's live. Great. So will I see who's also joining or not? It will just be this. Yeah. Yeah, people jumping in and out, and then you see everyone just dropping off after 5 minutes. You're like, oh no, we're done. Yes, I've added that into my. Yeah, that's fine. So I could essentially start like this and then go to my screen share. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. So okay. Okay. So what I'm going to try and do. I was hoping I could get my talk up on my screen, so I'm like looking directly at the screen. But then I think it's going to interfere with my PowerPoint presentation. I'm not going to be able to do it. Yeah, if I do a new window as well, let me just try this. Okay, so if I start off here, you can just see me at the moment, can't you? All right. Okay. So do you want me to run through the whole thing? Yeah. Yeah, but I'll test out some of the transition at the start and end. And then there's a few bits where it's just a bit patchy at the moment. But I'll tell you when I'm getting to that bit. So morning everyone, I'm Anna O'Sullivan. Today I'm going to share some thoughts and ideas on how we can support leaders to communicate effectively during change. I know that many of you listening are already working through change within your business. And today what I wanted to look at is change comms from the perspective of being a leader. My central message today is that I believe by understanding more about the journey that a leader is going on during large-scale change, how they're feeling and thinking during that change and the pressures that they're under, then we can better support them. I think that's become most apparent to me during my time at Pearson. I've supported. Oh, hello. Oh, I think you probably just hung up because you're hopefully this has continued the broadcast, because I was talking through my phone, which might have explained the lag. So I'm just going to continue, and call me back if that's not the case. Where was I? So firstly, I'm going to cover the role of the leader during change, the job that they will be doing. Next, how communication plays into each aspect of their role. And then want to explain some of the leadership behaviours and reactions that I've observed working with leaders during my career. And finally, I'm going to share some of the tactics and ideas that I've used for each of these leadership styles and the nuances that might be useful for you. By the end, I'm going to leave you with 5 key takeaways for supporting through change, as well as a bunch of tactics and examples that hopefully can spark some ideas too. So before I jump into a few slides, firstly, I'll just briefly introduce you to Pearson, as partly today I want to use my experiences at Pearson over the last 4 years. I've worked at Pearson for almost 4 years now, first in employee comms, and in the last 2 weeks started a new role as Director for Corporate Affairs for our UK and core markets. Change really is part of who we are here. We're a company that's 175 years old this year, and we haven't always been, how shall I put this, as strategically focused on education as we are now. So if I told you that Pearson started out as a construction company, once owned Madame Tussauds, as well as the production company that made Baywatch, then I think you get the idea. Thankfully, now we've made up our minds and we're sticking to it. So we are a global learning company, an education company, which combines great learning content and assessments and then powers that with technology. In the UK, we own some well-known brands such as the BTEC qualification, Edexcel Exam Board, but we're much more than that. It's a global business, 24,000 employees in 60 countries, and an operating profit in 2018 of £546 million. And because of the focus on education, we can really rally behind a much more unified, strong mission, which is to empower people to progress in their lives through learning. So back to the change, back to this presentation, from Baywatch, I guess, to BTEC. Once we focus on education, our most challenging change has been over the last few years, as like many companies, we've needed to digitally transform, not just to survive, but to survive. Not just to thrive, but to survive. Outwardly, we've had to follow the consumer shift away from learning through books and textbooks to, like I guess many of us did at school, to learning online through really interactive, easy to use learning resources. And that's meant transforming what was a publishing house and a publishing business into a digital learning company, and inwardly becoming much more simpler and more efficient in how we work, and supporting that through the business model change. So I'm just going to bring up my slides now. If you could just bear with me for 2 moments. So here we are. This is the story of our last year, and it's really positive year of progress for Pearson, meeting our targets, meeting our cost-saving targets, becoming really digital as a company, and stabilising and growing the business. But to give you a few examples of what sits behind this, we sold businesses, over the last few years, we've sold businesses, including The Economist, Penguin Random House, Wall Street English, a school's courseware business. And I'm going to rattle through some of these changes just so you can understand the sheer amount that we've gone through within Pearson to set the scene for the rest of this presentation. We've shifted the business model away from selling textbooks to selling access to content through subscriptions and rentals. job losses totaling 3,000 people, investing £750 million a year in product development, implementing single systems to replace dozens of outdated, fragmented ones, including a single enterprise resource planning system. If anyone's done that in their own business, then you'll know how much work is involved in that. And then reducing some legacy applications, data centers, office locations from the thousands down to and hundreds down to double digits. And I've worked with both our finance and technology teams here, including support on the day one announcement of that £330 million cost saving target and the associated job losses. So the story behind this, or more what I've learned, is what I want to share more on today, as well as drawing on my further experience before Pearson 2. So on to leaders during change. What happens to leaders during change? What is their job? What are they spending their time on? I think it comes down to three main areas. They're identifying the vision and the strategy for the change. It could be to simplify the business, grow to new markets, change the operating model. They're then involved in making decisions, and a lot of them. This is utterly relentless during change. It's where the pressure comes from. It's where the time and the headspace of the leader is, because the decision making will often be in the form of lengthy steering committee meetings and bulky pre-reads, and the leader is expected to be across all of this information. And then thirdly, they're driving the delivery, driving their teams, often under a lot of pressure in terms of making sure it's within budget and within the timescales they've communicated to shareholders, investors, customers and employees. You'll notice I haven't added communication as one of the jobs of a leader during change. That's intentional, because I believe that once you do that, it becomes set apart and distinct, when actually it's absolutely critical and foundational to everything that a leader does during change. So starting with the vision, how does communication play into that? It needs to be translated into a story that will inspire and motivate employees beyond their day-to-day work. It will help them understand why budgets might need to be cut, jobs will be lost, and retraining will need to be done to adapt to new systems. And it will keep that motivation high throughout that change, and it will motivate them to innovate and generate ideas and commit more fully to their organisation. During decision making, this is going to be done behind closed doors often, but it becomes incredibly important when it comes to generating further change that those decisions are communicated carefully with credibility, strong rationale and accountability. I'll come back to it later, but one of the key roles of internal comms will be to help leaders make better decisions, simply by helping them become more informed about the impact of their decisions, what needs to be done and what's already being done. And thirdly, for driving delivery, well, delivery is 100% about the people. A leader again needs to be able to motivate and inspire people to deliver, and they do this through communication, role modelling. If you've seen Kotter's model for change, then you'll also know that driving delivery is a heavy lift at the start in first getting the buy-in and support for the change. So that includes building a sense of urgency, a coalition of people who will deliver the change, the vision itself, and removing obstacles along the way. So far, so good. We know the importance of communication. We know that the role of the leader is key. So how can you unlock the potential of leadership to help them communicate more effectively? As I mentioned at the start of my presentation, I've encountered a number of different leadership styles and behaviours during change. Delving deeper into these and understanding why has helped me adapt my support. Often we tend to characterise the leaders we support into what we observe, those who appear to be reluctant and resistant to communicate during change, and those who really get it and lead from the front and centre. And I don't know about you, but I've worked with quite a few from that first category over the years. And actually looking closer, here are some reasons why that might be the case. So I'm now going to work through 6 of the scenarios I've seen, and also some of the lessons I've learned for how comms can support in these situations. So firstly, how is the leader spending their time? What keeps them awake at night? Earlier, I shared the role of the leader during change, and all those steering committees and steering groups and decision making and risk management, which fills the bulk of the time for them. Change often doesn't run smoothly, so this time and focused isn't fixed. It's likely to fluctuate a lot during change. And it's why the better you can understand the change, the more you can understand why a leader might seem to be reluctant to communicating. So as an example, on the day that we announced the £330 million cost saving programme to our market and investors, I also had to help our Chief Financial Officer communicate this internally to his finance function of 1,400 people globally. In our last catch up, he talked me through how he was essentially having to memorise for that external communication, reams and reams of information and data for his financial update. And this one was going to be particularly challenging because it wasn't good news to be sharing. That insight helped me develop a plan to support him that would be in tune with the pressure and heavy workload he was under, while also still ensuring he was supporting his team through the difficult announcement. So here are some solutions for what I think is really important if you meet a leader that is so focused on the change itself. Firstly, being really sensitive to their time. It's a really basic piece of advice, but short emails with your recommendations highlighted clearly and really concise briefings that are just in tune with the fact that they really are time poor. Secondly, try and get that face-to-face meeting in with them early on in the process before the change is really picking up pace. Speak to their assistant or someone that works very closely with them to find out when to time this appropriately so that it's not before or after a big meeting. I used to meet with our CFO early mornings if I could, because then I knew that he could really focus in on our discussion. Third, sharing a plan early is critical. This takes the mental load away from the leader, knowing that you're proactively that step ahead. What I don't mean here is that the ownership falls to you as the comms person, but it frees up their focus from is there a plan to what's the content of the plan. And fourthly, driving ownership through other leaders is very important too. After the announcement, I arranged for our CFO to run a briefing for his skip level team. So that's not his leadership team, but the group after that, a group of 30 vice presidents, so that they could reinforce the communication, spread the load, so to speak, and answer questions among their teams. Fifth, I also worked very closely with his deputy CFO and the finance leadership team to build out a plan, which actually helped drive ownership across the whole leadership team, but also meant I could reduce the interactions I was having with the CFO or the emails to him, because I was getting it into a good shape before it arrived with him. So the second type of leader style that I've seen is those with a different type of communication style. I can think of one example with a leader I proposed floor walking to during key change periods, and this was a disaster. He hated it because he's generally an introvert, and the style of this just didn't work for him. The small talk that he needed to do and the approaching lots of groups of employees. And rightly or wrongly, we had to adapt to that. But actually, if you put him into a more structured environment, such as a town hall or an open forum, he was wonderful, engaging, confident. I'm going to have to move rooms, so bear with me for a couple of minutes and I'll come back. I won't log off, I'm just going to move.
Thank you.
Sorry. So a few solutions here for adapting to a leadership style. This is an area where we often build out activities from the ground up based on the employee. But actually, yes, floor walking would be great for employees. The danger is that you can end up not making an impact that you want if the leader is uncomfortable. Face-to-face time is critical, so look for ways to do this that suit the leader. At Pearson, we run sessions called Unplugs. These are unscripted, hour-long meetings between the leader and a small group of 10 to 15 employees.
where the employees have the opportunity to discuss what's on their mind and ask the leader anything they want. These are much more suited to an introverted leader. In fact, they tend to work well with all leaders. And going back to leaders who are short on time, they're also an important way to get a leader to a pulse check on what's happening. Have them spend 1 hour of focus time with a group of employees that are representative of your workforce and that you know will be open about the issues on the ground. And this can help leaders know more about what's going on and help them to do their job better and make better decisions. The third type of leader is looking at how they handle ambiguity. So I think comms are very good at advising leaders to communicate even when there's no new information to share. We know that it's important that the employees don't feel a vacuum with their own information and gossip. My go-to advice for leaders has always been, it's okay if you don't know the answer. Take a note of the question and commit to getting back to the group at a later date. Easy enough in theory, right? Well, this is really hard. Now that I've led my own teams and we've been through change and restructures, I was faced with this challenge personally. And what did I do? I postponed team meetings and I worried about what to say because I didn't have the answers. So secondly, this goes against everything you know about being a leader. You're supposed to be the one with the answer, so this is likely to be new and uncomfortable territory. And conversely too, there's a nervousness when the leader has much more information than can be shared right now. They don't want to mess it up and say more than they know. So in these situations, this is where you need to do two things. Have good conversations and coaching with the leader. And this is where my presentation needs to be found up. I'm going to go through good conversations and coaching, and then scripts, talking points and FAQs. And then I move on to the fourth type of leadership behaviour, and that is, have they already processed the change? So most of you will be familiar with the change curve, and it's still the best way to understand why leaders can sometimes unintentionally appear tone deaf to employees. They've gotten used to the change over the course of weeks, maybe months, before employees get to hear about the change. So there's naturally that sort of empathy disconnect there, and it's your job to bring that back. So in these situations, I'd recommend, again, XYZ. I'll go through 2 to 3 examples of things that people can do in those situations. On to the fifth type of leader behaviour that I see. Do they feel ownership of change communication? This is what we see as leaders who do not see it as their job to be communicating. Hopefully this is rare, but there's still an occasion when leadership sees their job as delivering the change, while the change communications team and the comms team role is to deliver the communication on the change. Again, I'll give 2 examples of how to overcome that. And finally, the 6th type of leadership behaviour that I've observed. Do they just need some help? Hopefully more often you'll find leaders who are willing and ready, but they just need help. They're ready to go, perhaps a little bit time poor, but they are very willing. It's worth saying here, it doesn't mean they might not slip into one of the other categories I've been through previously during the change, so it's worth monitoring them to see if that's likely to happen. And then again, I'll go through 2 examples of how to support this type of leader. So hopefully there is some insight into the headspace of different leaders as they go through change. All of these can be different reasons behind a reluctance or a willingness to communicate. And then I will have potentially a couple of minutes on what else is important, and that's going to cover things like leaders not just being the only channel that you can use. And then my final 5 takeaways. So to end, I want to leave you with 5 key takeaways. Number 1, effectively supporting leadership during change starts way before change. It starts now. It starts with the relationships and trust that you have with leaders that enable you to cut to the heart of the issues during change. And it starts with having the right channels and tools and engagement in place. 2, once change begins, focus on understanding what's happening, the full journey and the impacts before you put together your comms plans. 3, crucially put yourself in the shoes of the leader to understand the barriers and complexities to their role, which you'll need to take into account when proposing change communications. My one ask here, and if it's the single most important thing that I leave you with today, is to not take at face value the resistance or reluctance that you might encounter, but to delve deeper to understand why and how you can fix it. 4, take time for yourself. If leaders are in the eye of the storm during change, that means you are too. You'll see everything up close, you'll feel the pressure they're under, you'll always feel that you can do more and better. And 5, finally, remember it is worth it. Going through this sort of change has led to the formation of much deeper shared understanding between the business and comms within Pearson. To end, I want to share one particularly proud moment which came many months into the transformation that had begun here and that I'd begun this presentation with. My CFO was due to present at a forum to talk about Pearson's digital transformation and the finance function transformation. He shared his presentation with me to review, and as I skipped to the last slide, I saw that he'd listed out what he had learned through the journey. As you can see, for his second point was relentless communication. As you can see, he'd seen how communication undoubtedly plays a critical role. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So now we've got 5 minutes for questions, I believe. Okay, Chris, I'm going to stop the broadcast if you want to give me a call back and I can get some feedback. Thank you.